There are moments in an empath's life that no one else notices. No dramatic event, no clear before and after, no explosion. The room looks the same, your life looks the same, you look the same, but something inside has shifted, and once you register it, the old way of moving through the world no longer works. It might happen at a dinner table. Everyone is laughing at an unfunny story, making small talk, exchanging superficial pleasantries that never touch anything real. You smile too, because you know how to play the part, but there's a flicker inside you, a tiny internal step backward. You feel as though you're watching the scene from a slight distance, almost like the camera pulled away just a few feet, just enough to show you a wider frame. And in that wider frame, you see something you didn't see before. None of this feels like home. You're still there, still present, still participating, but there's a feeling in your chest, one that says, quietly, I don't belong in this conversation anymore. No one else notices. Why would they? On the surface, everything looks fine, but inside, a thin crack has appeared. Not a dramatic one, more like a hairline, barely visible. Yet you feel it, unmistakably. You say something meaningful, something honest, something vulnerable, and the room doesn't quite know what to do with it. Someone replies with a generic comment, or changes the subject entirely. They didn't mean harm. They simply couldn't meet you where you were. That's when the awareness sharpens. You're laughing, you're nodding, but you're not there anymore. Your emotional body has stepped aside, watching quietly, gathering information. You observe the group dynamics, the emotional exchanges, the shallow shifts of mood. It's like the lights in the room dimmed slightly, not for everyone, but for you. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious enters when the psyche is ready, not when the ego is prepared. For an empath, this arrival rarely feels chaotic. Instead, it feels like clarity, quiet, precise, and uncomfortably honest. The unconscious doesn't send a storm, it sends a whisper. And once you hear it, you can never return to not knowing. Some people feel this shift in relationships. You start to notice that the friend you've supported through countless emotional crises rarely asks how you're doing. They love that you listen. They love that you understand them so deeply. But they don't, or can't, offer the same in return. Other times, it happens in romantic relationships. You're telling your partner about a feeling you've been processing, and they offer a practical solution instead. They think they are helping. But what you needed was not a solution. You needed resonance, presence, depth. What you receive instead is a transactional response. A mismatch. A missed moment. Workplaces trigger it too. In a meeting, someone shares a half-baked opinion confidently, while you, who can feel the emotional implications and psychological layers beneath decisions, stay quiet. Because you've learned that speaking full truth often pushes people away. You've learned to read the room before you speak. You've learned to shrink. It's here that the inner questions begin. Why does no one feel as deeply as I do? Why am I always the one who notices what others overlook? Why do the people I understand so completely struggle to understand me at all? You try to ignore these questions. You try to keep moving, keep smiling, keep belonging. But the crack grows. Not outwardly. No one else sees anything wrong. But inwardly, it expands. This is the threshold. The moment in the film when the score changes, the lighting shifts, the scene grows quiet. Nothing flashy. Just a subtle shift that signals. Your story is entering a new act. You're not imagining it. You are beginning. Soon, you will face the first turning point. Every empath eventually reaches a moment when the emotional depth they so naturally offer is not returned. It rarely begins with tragedy. Instead, it starts quietly, an off conversation, a vulnerable truth met with a response that doesn't touch what was shared. Nothing seems wrong on the surface. yet the exchange feels hollow. Your intuition notices. It always does. With time, this pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You realize how often you've been the emotional translator, the one who hears pain behind silence, who senses longing beneath calm, who understands someone's inner world before they do. It's instinct, not effort. Because it feels natural, you assume others can do the same. You expect reciprocity. If I understand you deeply, you will understand me deeply. But then comes the fracture, the painful moment you realize they can't. Not won't. Can't. And that changes everything. You look back and see the pattern clearly. Conversations you carried alone. Times you asked thoughtful questions and received shallow answers. Moments you supported others through crisis but were abandoned when you needed help. You remember explaining your emotions only to be dismissed as too sensitive or dramatic. Many of these people cared about you, but they couldn't meet you at your depth. They lacked emotional language, inner access, psychological awareness. Carl Jung warned that we project our inner world onto others. Empaths do this intensely. We fall in love not with who someone is, but who they could be. We relate to potential as if it were real. The shattered mirror is the moment that projection collapses. You stop seeing possibility and start seeing reality. You realize the relationship you believed in was one you created. You thought you met someone halfway, only to see you cross the river alone. As awareness sharpens, the imbalance becomes undeniable. You listen deeply, they listen casually. You remember their history, they forget your milestones. You take responsibility for their feelings, they take none for yours. You anticipate needs, yours go unnoticed. These truths reshape your inner architecture. You see that your emotional relationships were never symmetrical. The loneliness here is not about lacking people. It's about being unseen by the people you have. Once the mirror breaks, the illusion cannot be restored. You replay memories with painful clarity, moments when conversations left you empty, relationships where you held space for someone's pain, only to realize they never once asked about yours. You recall being the emotional scaffold, supporting others while receiving silence when you needed structure. This disillusionment cuts deep. You recognize that what felt mutual was mostly one-sided. They didn't see your depths, just your outline. Patterns become visible. The friend who seeks you only in crisis. The partner who demands emotional presence but offers distance. The parent who leans on you but never nurtures. The co-worker who vents but won't listen. You once interpreted these dynamics as signs of strength or maturity. Now you see that they slowly cost you pieces of yourself. Jung taught that projection is a developmental stage, one that must fall for reality to emerge. Reality is more limited, more flawed, more human than the dream. It hurts, like waking from a vivid vision you wish you could return to. But the shattered mirror doesn't just reveal others, it reveals you. You realize your depth is rare. What felt normal to you was extraordinary. You assumed your perception was universal. Now you see it's a gift and a burden. At first, you internalize the pain. Am I too much? Why do I feel so deeply? What's wrong with me? Slowly, you understand. The issue isn't that you feel too much. It's that others feel less, not because they are shallow, but because their emotional landscape is smaller, quieter, less connected. Some people simply don't have the map. This realization is liberating and lonely, because once the mirror breaks, you no longer see reflections, you see surfaces, and surfaces cannot hold your depth. You begin withdrawing. You share less. You give less. Not from bitterness, but from clarity. Connection cannot be carried alone. This is the first turning point. The moment you see what's real. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But this awareness leads to an even deeper truth. That to keep these relationships alive, you have been abandoning yourself. Which leads to turning point number 2. If the first turning point shatters the illusion of reciprocity, the second exposes its cost. You begin disappearing inside your own life. This stage unfolds quietly, through small choices that seem harmless. You soften your opinions to keep the peace. You mute your emotions so you won't be judged. You stay silent when your truth would disrupt the room. At first, it feels like kindness. But slowly, you drift away from your own center. Psychologists call this self-abandonment. Jung described it through the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted. It's useful, even necessary. But when the mask becomes the identity, the inner self suffocates. Many empaths learn early that their emotional intensity is too much, so they turn themselves down. They become peacekeepers, interpreters, emotional regulators, valued for their calmness but only when invisible. Over time, this adapting becomes instinct. You show others not who you are, but who they can handle. You become the safe place for everyone, except yourself. The dissolving self shows up in small habits. Saying it's okay when it isn't. Apologizing for existing. Giving when exhausted. Listening deeply but struggling to speak. Hiding needs to avoid burdening others. People often admire you for this. They praise your emotional intelligence, your patience, your generosity. They never see the cost, because they only know the persona. Inside, something hollows out, not sadness, but absence. You look in the mirror and feel unfamiliar. You can describe what others feel, but when someone asks what you feel, you freeze. The inner house once full of color feels emptied, room by room, boundary by boundary, until only a faint outline remains. Yet on the outside, everything looks fine. You're functioning. Relationships are stable. But inside, you're fading. This is the most dangerous place for an empath. You lose access to yourself. You've spent so long merging with others that your emotional core is submerged. Eventually, a quiet truth forms. You aren't sure who you are when no one else is present. This realization often arrives in stillness, a night alone, no one to manage. Suddenly you feel weightless, like you lose gravity the moment you're not orbiting someone's needs. Who am I when no one needs anything from me? What do I want when I'm not adapting? There are no answers, not because they are buried, but because they were never allowed to form. Empaths often carry a psychological pattern called self-other blurring, an instinctive merging with others. It explains why you absorb tensions before anyone notices, why you intuit someone's truth before they speak. But the price is identity confusion. You become a mirror, reflecting everyone while remaining unseen. Eventually, cracks form. Resentment rises, not because others exploit you intentionally, but because you taught them you didn't need support. You trained them to believe you had no needs. And they believed you. Now the consequences are visible. You've become the emotional anchor for everyone, yet internally you're homeless. You give endlessly, but no one carries you, not because they don't care, but because you erased the map back to your heart. The breaking point often appears in ordinary moments. Someone asks, "Where do you want to eat?" And you freeze, not because you lack preference, but because you've practiced accommodating others for so long that your own desires feel unreachable. Someone asks how you're feeling, and you mentally scan what answer will make them comfortable. Your truth feels irrelevant. Harmony comes first. This is the final stage of self-erasure. Your emotions are shaped by others instead of arising from within. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona leads to spiritual starvation. The mask becomes the prison. The self becomes the prisoner. Your inner voice grows faint, not because it disappears, but because it was never allowed to speak. Yet in the quiet collapse, something emerges, a whisper beneath the rubble. Come back. At first, you ignore it. It feels selfish, risky. Your identity has been built on not needing anything. But the whisper persists. When you're exhausted and someone asks for more, when you can't remember the last time you felt joy, when someone praises your strength and you feel nothing. It is the call of the self, guiding you toward wholeness. The return is slow, awkward. You notice your needs, then apologize. You set a boundary, then fear it. You say no, then worry you'll be abandoned. But these small acts teach your nervous system that safety can come from within. You begin experimenting with self-preservation, resting when tired, stepping away from draining conversations, letting others hold their own pain. These choices feel rebellious, but each one confirms, I am allowed to exist. As you reclaim fragments of yourself, some relationships resist. Some pull away, but others appear, people who can meet you where you are. The dissolving self marks the end of living through others. It is painful and disorienting, but essential, because the moment you return to yourself, a quiet space opens, vast, unfamiliar. And that space leads to turning point number 3. After the collapse of projection, the shattered mirror, and the recovery of authenticity, the dissolving self, something unexpected arrives. Silence. Not external silence. Life moves on. People speak. Work continues. Relationships remain. But inside, there is a stillness that feels both unsettling and sacred. For the first time, you are not scanning emotional weather, merging with others, or adjusting yourself to maintain harmony. You're simply present, and presence feels foreign. At first, the quiet void resembles isolation. Your emotional life once depended on entanglement. Now there is space where fusion used to be. No inner narrator reflecting others' moods. No emotional atmosphere to absorb. Just you. And that is terrifying, because you've never really been alone with yourself. Jung would say this is when the ego recognizes its boundary, the visceral realization that your consciousness is yours alone. No matter how deeply someone loves you, they cannot inhabit your inner world. This births a new kind of solitude, not loneliness, but aloneness. You sit beside your partner and feel the distinction. You recognize their emotions, but know they are not yours. You speak with a friend and feel compassion without absorbing their anxiety. The psyche is recalibrating. The self claims its ground. You begin to differentiate. Empathy versus enmeshment, compassion versus absorption, love versus fusion. Slowly, the void becomes peaceful. Without constant emotional noise, clarity emerges. Thoughts assemble. Feelings surface. Longings once projected outward return inward. You begin noticing the contours of your inner landscape, needs, desires, fears, values, buried for years beneath other people's emotions. At first, the space feels empty. Then you realize, it isn't empty, only spacious. A room inside you has finally opened, and for the first time, you are home. Inside this stillness, you meet yourself directly, without persona, without the emotional interpreter that once filtered your truth. It can feel like loss of intensity, of emotional highs, of fusion mistaken for love. The absence of drama feels boring. You wonder if you're becoming cold. But slowly, you understand, you're becoming grounded. Your attention turns inward, not to retreat, but to witness. You notice subtle signals in your body, tension when you ignore intuition, exhaustion after carrying others emotionally. You begin seeing patterns, not in others, but in yourself. Here, the shadow emerges, the parts of you never given space, needs unspoken, boundaries unprotected, anger unexpressed, grief unacknowledged. The void allows these fragments to surface. The shadow is not a villain, it is a doorway. It was never your sensitivity that drained you, only the lack of boundaries. It was never empathy that exhausted you, only unconscious merging. It was never depth that isolated you, only the roles you performed to be loved. In the void, you understand these truths without judgment. You see why you became who you became, how your gifts formed through survival. This clarity brings compassion, not for others, but for yourself. The quiet void teaches you the difference between holding space and holding responsibility, witnessing and carrying, between empathy and self-erasure. As your inner world reorganizes, your relationships shift. Some deepen because they rest on truth instead of performance. Others fade, not from conflict, but lack of foundation. Some remain outwardly the same, but internally, you no longer play the caretaker. You begin choosing differently. You no longer bond only through pain. You no longer feel compelled to fix people. You no longer confuse intensity with connection. Your nervous system learns something new. Stillness is safe. There may be grief for the versions of yourself you had to become, for relationships that cannot follow, for the years spent looking for yourself in others. But this grief cleans and prepares you. In the quiet void, you begin integrating everything: intuition, depth, boundaries, connection. You stop choosing between self and other. You allow both. Something else emerges, an inner authority. It does not shout. It simply knows. It knows when to say no. Which relationships nourish you? When you're abandoning yourself. When your intuition speaks. And you listen, not out of obligation, but because you've tasted wholeness. This is Jung's individuation, the journey toward who you truly are beneath adaptation. The quiet void reveals the deepest truth. You do not need another person to inhabit your inner world for it to be real. Intimacy doesn't require fusion. It requires presence. And now, finally, you can be present, not as healer, mirror, or container, but as yourself. From here, everything changes. These three turning points, whether they unfold over months or decades, form the psychological architecture of an awakened empath. It begins with the shattered mirror, when you realize not everyone can meet you at the depth where you naturally live. The illusion collapses. You stop projecting potential onto people who lack the capacity or desire to grow into it. You begin seeing reality, not to become cynical, but grounded. You're freed from the fantasy that someone else is responsible for understanding you completely. You learn that depth is not a universal language. Then comes the dissolving self, where you recognize the price you've paid for belonging. Years of tiny compromises, quiet self-silencing, emotional labor, and constant adaptation have eroded your sense of identity. You believed connection meant being what others needed, agreeable, flexible, low maintenance. Eventually, you face the hollow space inside and see how far you've drifted from your truth. This awareness is painful, but also liberating. You slowly return to your own center, experimenting with boundaries, expressing needs, rediscovering preferences, reclaiming your inner world. The journey is messy, awkward, deeply human. Finally, you arrive at the quiet void, where everything reorganizes. The noise fades. Merging dissolves. A new kind of solitude emerges, not abandonment, but arrival. You meet yourself honestly. You understand that your inner world doesn't require external confirmation. You no longer need someone to inhabit your inner landscape to feel real or safe. From this stillness, you build a foundation rooted in authenticity rather than adaptation. You learn to love without losing yourself, to hold others without carrying them, to connect without merging. And something beautiful happens. You stop asking the world to complete you. You stop searching for emotional mirrors. You stop sacrificing yourself to stay connected. Instead, you begin living from your center. You become clear, not cold. Compassionate, not porous. Present, not absorbed. People feel the difference. Some will move away. Others will move closer. But either way, you remain intact. These turning points do not harden you. They refine you. They bring you back to yourself. This is the heart of Jung's warning. and his invitation. The goal is not to lose sensitivity, but to pair sensitivity with selfhood, to feel deeply without dissolving, to love fully without abandoning, to walk with others without disappearing. You learn that your inner world is not a place others must live inside. It's a place from which you live. So now I ask you, which turning point are you living through? Are you facing the shattered mirror, realizing others cannot meet your depth? Are you confronting the dissolving self, feeling the cost of self-abandonment? Or entering the quiet void, meeting yourself in a spacious new way? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may be the mirror someone else has been searching for. If this journey resonated with you, like, subscribe, and stay close. The path continues, forward, inward, toward yourself.